Welcome to Let's Talk, hosted by David B Plemons, CPA Inc. Here, we will focus on the struggle, the juggle, and everyday hustle of small business. We will be here weekly talking to small business owners about their everyday struggles. We welcome your questions and comments, so feel free to email us at admin@plemonscpa.com. We hope you enjoy, and above all, we hope it helps.
Well, welcome to Let's Talk. We have here today Mr. Carlos Acosta of Live Fund. Welcome, Carlos, to Let's Talk.
Well, thank you for having me. Really excited to be sitting here with you today.
Excellent, excellent. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you managed to land with Live Fund.
Awesome. Well, no problem. So it's a very interesting story, actually. So I landed with Live Fund in 2014. Before that, I was in the military, so I was fresh out of active duty.
Well, welcome and thank you for your service.
Well, you're welcome. So I got out of the military. I moved from Washington State to San Antonio, Texas, and I had no idea what I was going to be doing. It's very scary but exciting, and I had so many options available, fortunately for me. But my background and what I was doing in the Navy is what I thought I was going to be doing, and I'm so far from that.
What was that?
That was logistics. So I did logistics for the military, and when I got out, what I had in mind was just to go right into what I've been doing already. But as life has it, it threw me a curveball, one that I kind of caught, I guess. And so I came across this opportunity through a friend of mine who introduced me to this program that took individuals who had recently finished their degrees or whatever, for whatever reason, are looking to gain experience in any particular field.
Okay.
And since I was fresh out of the military, had no idea where I was going, I decided, why not?
Okay.
And so I joined the program, and through that program, I got introduced to then Acción Texas, now Live Fund, and I went to this matching fair. I chose them, they chose me, match made in heaven, and I started working with them, and in particular, the Women's Business Center.
Okay.
So I started working with them as an intern and doing what typical interns do, right?
Grunt work.
Yes, updating marketing material, and just like really, basically, I'm the assistant, right?
Correct.
But it was a great experience, and through that experience, I was exposed to something that had never even crossed my mind, and that was entrepreneurship.
Okay.
Right? And the resources that are available to these aspiring entrepreneurs and small business owners. And so part of my internship was to do some research for my former director and the business advisors at that time, so that way when they met with the clients, they had some takeaways, some tangible items that they can give them. So I did this for about 9 months or so. 9 to 10 months, I believe, is the duration of that program I was in. And through that, I, again, just kind of really fell in love with the work that they were doing and the impact that it had with all of the individuals that were taking advantage of these resources.
Okay.
So in my curiosity, I decided to speak to the director at the time and see if there was anything I can do outside of updating marketing material.
Right.
And I spoke to her, and fortunately, she was very willing to let me play a more active role in that process.
Okay.
So then she kind of had me do a few other things outside of what I was already doing. And then I got to the point where she would let me shadow their consultations. And that just sparked my curiosity even more. And then I got to the point where I was like, well, should I ask? Should I not ask? And I was like, can I, maybe lead one of these consultations? And she was like, sure.
Wow.
No problem. She goes, just as long as you kind of go through this process, right? So she gave me great guidance, gave me all the tools that I needed, and she sat in on my first few consultations with these clients, and these clients were individuals that were looking to grow or start their business or access capital, and then the program ended. So I was back in that what am I going to do now phase. And so I asked, and they said, you know what, well, actually before I asked, before the program ended, we started up the conversation of what's next, right? So we kind of left it up in the air. And then when the contract ended, we returned to that conversation, and they asked if I wanted to do a paid internship outside of that program with them. So I said yes. And then that internship turned into a contract position. So I did contract work for a while, and just all throughout, I was just learning so many new things outside of what my comfort zone was, which is logistics, and I was just soaking it all in. And after my contract was over, they offered me a formal position with the organization, and of course I accepted. And that's kind of how I got to not only Live Fund but the Women's Business Center, and has been a great journey ever since. Ups and downs, of course, but more ups than downs, and wouldn't change anything.
Excellent. Well, tell us a little bit about Live Fund and the Women's Business Center. What do they offer?
So Live Fund is an organization that offers access to capital for individuals who don't necessarily meet the underwriting guidelines for traditional financial institutions, right? So what people tend to think of when they think of a bank, right? Live Fund is a nonprofit. It's a CDFI, which allows them the flexibility to really lend to these individuals, and these individuals are people who are facing a variety of hurdles, right? Whether it's, their credit just isn't where it needs to be, or they're a true startup. And this is something that I see very often as a business advisor in helping clients who are wanting to access capital but are being told not right now, right?
And that's usually the challenge too, because normally when you're a startup, there is no startup funding for you. And Live Fund now offers that. That's good news.
So
good news.
It is, definitely. And don't get me wrong, Live Fund does have its underwriting guidelines, but they are a little more flexible than that of a traditional financial institution. And what they've done is they lowered those barriers of entry, right, for those individuals or true startups to really access the capital that most oftentimes is needed for these startups. As you may be very familiar with, outside of testing the viability of their concept and doing the market research, funding is always this it's the elephant in the room. It's like, okay, I got this great idea. Now who's willing to give me money so I can start, right? And banks typically don't do that. So Live Fund came in 1994, or then Acción decided to provide these small business loans to these individuals, and has had great success, so much so that they've expanded into 13 additional states.
Excellent. Wow.
So these resources are not just available in Texas, but they are available within our footprint, right? So if anybody is interested in those services, they can just go to the website and find out if there's an office near them, right? So that's what the Live Fund organization does, and that's how they provide. Well, I'm sorry, I didn't answer that, but what they do is provide access to capital to those small business owners who don't meet those underwriting guidelines. Now, the Women's Business Center. Live Fund had already been providing access to capital with great success to these individuals, and had established these unofficial and some official partnerships with financial institutions. And then in 2008, they said, hey, there's a great opportunity with the Small Business Administration, the SBA, to provide technical support to our clients. And Live Fund saw this as a great opportunity in taking these borrowers,
Right.
and then providing the business education, right? It was a complimentary service. Well, not complimentary, but it complements, the loan programs that Live Fund has.
Because it gives them education.
Yes.
To better manage their money, manage the capital, manage the loan funds, so that they can be more viable once they receive them, or even be positioned to receive them.
Exactly, right? And what happens if they don't want money? Well, we're able to help them out with that as well. So, at some point or another, a business is going to want to get funding from whatever channel they choose to do so. And with the Women's Business Center, as an additional program underneath the Live Fund umbrella in partnership with the SBA, they're able to really help these individuals better understand that, what the route to accessing capital really entails, and education, not just for accessing capital, but how do I create a business, and how do I increase the chances of being successful, and more importantly, sustainable, right? Because startups are very, it's already a high risk phase, if you would.
Yes.
And
that's why banks don't want to go ahead and lend money.
Exactly, right? And this is why banks really applaud and support the work that we do, not just with the lending, but with the business support, because they know that when they come through us, we're going to expose these small business owners and these aspiring entrepreneurs to things that they won't know to look for, right? So we're educating them, we're having them speak with business advisors like myself and third-party resources to really help educate them and increase those chances, right? So whenever they decide, if they ever decide to access that capital, they're in a better position, and they do so with a little more confidence.
True enough. And then they also may find out, no, this isn't for me after all, so I need to just go back and be an employee.
Exactly. And that's not a fail, right? So I count that as a huge success, right? Because there's plenty of times where I've sat across the table from a client who was so ready to start their own business, and after we've gone over all of the details, they just were so overwhelmed because they thought it was just going to be, I open up the doors, I have a product that my mom and my brothers and sisters and father think is great.
Right, and I have a business card.
And I have a business card, I went to Vistaprint. And so they think it's just that's it, right? But there's so much that is involved with starting your own business that some individuals decide exactly that. And that's, maybe owning a small business just isn't for me, or I'm not ready at this time.
Yes,
right?
That's the key. That knowledge gives them that awareness that they may not be ready yet, because mom and dad, aunt and uncle, and the family barbecue said, yeah, this is a great product, dude. You should really sell this. They may be good at making the product, but running the business, totally different, because they can't see all angles of it. They only see, I make the product is good. But what else does a small business entail?
Yeah, so, and that's one of the greatest things about this is, right, it's seeing the transformation from, the, I guess, individual in the bubble, right? And that bubble it's just them and friends and family that are very encouraging and supporting, right?
Which is critical.
Yeah, it is. And it's great to have that support team and that foundation. However, as we all know in business, it's not very nice out there, right? It's very cutthroat at times, very tough. And when you're dealing with strangers, they're going to tell you the truth. They're not afraid to hurt your feelings that your product isn't to par, right? So these clients, we really help them throughout the entire process. If they decide to move forward with the concept, and then we'll guide them, and that guidance comes in so many different forms, right? Because the Women's Business Center not only provides the one-on-one consultations, but we know that we're not the subject matter expert in everything. So what we do is we find those subject matter experts. We go out into the community, we find them, and we invite them into our facility to teach on a variety of topics. All of these topics are designed to educate that individual, to give them that exposure to broaden their horizon, if you would.
Correct.
And outside of those one-on-one consultations, we also do specialized programs. Accelerator programs, whether it's for the youth, for female entrepreneurs, or the arts, right?
Yes.
Because that's a whole nother beast in its own, right? So,
Correct.
the Women's Business Center is there to educate, to encourage, and to help build confidence in anybody that reaches out to the center for this assistance. And one thing that I'd like to note is that, even though our name is the Women's Business Center, we don't just provide services for women.
I'm sure that was one of the questions that our audience was going to ask. Was this only for women only? Because I know the guys are like, hey, I need that too.
Yeah, and guys are welcome. I mean, I'm the token guy.
Yeah.
Because usually when I go out, I find myself being the only guy in a women. In a woman's, I guess, community or environment.
Right.
Actually, that's better, environment.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in the Women's Business Center, and these services are not just for women. So if a male decides I need support, can I get some help? Come on in, right? We're here to help anybody.
Gotcha.
And guys come in with their wives because their wives are starting their business, and then like 5 minutes before we close out the session, they're like, well, can I come in too because I want to start my own business? Sure.
Exactly.
Or whatever we've gone over in this consultation. If it's something that you can take with you, use it. I mean,
correct.
We're not going to say no.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's circle back a little bit. Let's talk about those capital investments. Let's talk about how that could be used, or even the difference between a long-term capital investment or long-term cash versus short-term cash, the usage of them, because those are terms that are bantered around in the business community. And if you're brand new and you hear all these terms, you're going like, okay, what is that? Explain those a little bit if you can.
Yeah, so my advice would be to define them in a way that really helps you remember it, right? Now, these are terms that we hear very often when you're going through the traditional routes, right? But long term, first of all, before I actually start answering that, for individuals in the startup phase, identifying what sources of funding make sense. Right,
okay.
Because that's something that you're going to want to know ahead of time before you lock yourself into that short term, which may not be enough, or that long term, which is like, whoa, this is way too much, right?
Correct.
So identifying whether or not you need the funds to purchase equipment, or you just need it, to get you from one pay period to the next, right?
Oh, so there is a distinct difference then.
There is,
okay,
right? And just identifying what you're going to use the funds for, right, is what I would recommend them really look into before they actually start having these conversations with lenders. So going back to the question, what is the difference between a short-term and a long-term financing option? Long-term is typically anything over 1 year, right? Short-term is anything under 1 year, right? So if you're going to be using loan funds, or not just loans, but any cash infusion or investment, what have you, for a short-term solution, right? So going back to the example that I gave, pay period, if you need, if you're having challenges with cash flow, this is considered short term, right? Ideally, you don't want to get a loan for taking care of operations on a month-to-month basis and stretch that out for 2 to 3 years, because at that point, it's like, why am I in business? Right? Because if I can't meet the business's fixed expenses, within the first couple of months, and something's wrong, right? So you need to go back to the drawing board and see how you can address that, right?
Yeah.
So short term would fall into that category if I explained it properly. So hopefully the audience is picking that up.
Right.
If not, then sorry.
We'll explain more if they call us or contact
definitely.
us. Yes.
So we're always here to help. So long term. So oftentimes individuals kind of come in and say, hey, you know what? I need to purchase equipment. I need to purchase a building. I need to purchase a vehicle. These are things that I would say aren't able to be paid within that 1 year time frame, right?
Correct.
So these are things where you're going to have to take out a loan and pay out in 3, 5, 10 years, right? Or whatever the terms are for the loan. And like the examples I just gave, these are for the acquisition of those assets that the business is going to have, tangible assets, the vehicles, the building, to really help that business owner really move forward. Now, where you pull this funding from is also something that's going to be left up to the business owner, right? So going back to the drawing board and saying, okay, well, am I in a position to be asking for money, right? Because a great business plan isn't always the only thing that they're going to look at, right?
True.
If you're already a pre-existing business, then you have a stronger chance of getting funding from a traditional lender, right?
And when you mean long-term or tenured or statured, are you looking at more than a year? Successful business? Okay.
Well, yes, more than a year. So typically, I guess I would call it a rule of thumb is if you've been in business for over 2 years, then try out your traditional lender. Right. If you are a true startup, anything under about a year and a half, then still reach out to them because chances are you're going to be told that, hey, come back when you've been in business and you have actual numbers that we can go off of.
Right.
And if for some reason they say, yeah, come on, then
Go
do
with
that.
them.
Then go with it.
Yeah.
Exactly. But if they say not right now, then taking a look at non-traditional lenders like Lifund or a CDFI, right?
Okay.
And these are organizations that can be found throughout the country. So regardless of what city or state that the audience member is in, there's a great chance that there's a CDFI there.
Okay.
So for long-term loans and short-term loans, CDFIs and traditional lenders can be a viable option, right?
Okay.
But going back to identifying what source you're going to get the money from, do understand that there are requirements, right?
Always.
Right? So it's not always, I have this great business plan and look at the numbers,
I'm projecting.
right?
Forecasting.
Well, I'm forecasting that I'm going to make $1 million in the first quarter.
Dream on.
Exactly, yes. So underwriters are very good at this, right?
Yes.
They're good at their job. They're there to poke holes in your projections.
Bust those bubbles.
Exactly, right? So when you're asking for money, and you got to understand that you can't just use the business plan. Traditional lenders will want to look at actual numbers. So that's why they ask for individuals that fall underneath or over the 2-year mark. If you fall underneath the 2-year mark, non-traditional lenders are a great option, among others, which I'll talk about here in a bit. But non-traditional lenders like Lifund will look at a few different things, right? And they'll take a page out of the traditional lenders. They're going to take a look at credit scores, credit history, capacity, experience, and public records, right? So these are all things that they're going to take into account, and not just your business plan and your projections, because like you mentioned, it's an assumption, right? This is what I think my business can do based off of the research that I've done,
and what my competitors have done, who I've managed to find in my market research to see how they're going in the industry and even industry standards. How frequently does this industry actually increase its sales, or how frequently is this industry actually, or is it cyclical? and that makes a difference in your market research.
It does, right? And market research is market research, right? It's completely different when you're in the trenches.
True.
Right? Because what worked for one company may not work for you.
True, because you're in Texas and they're in Minnesota.
Exactly. Yeah. Like here in Texas, we got Tex-Mex restaurants all over the place, right?
Oh, sure.
And I get plenty of clients that want to open up a Tex-Mex restaurant. I'm like, oh, not another one.
Yeah.
Okay. First thing is, how are you going to be different? Because I can throw a rock and hit 20 of you guys on the same block, right?
Yes.
So you really want to make sure that you are very different, and in a way that people are going to want to come in and eat at your restaurant or your food truck, right? So I feel like I'm getting off track, so I'm going to go back to the sources of funding. But identifying whether you want to go through a nonprofit lender, wanting to go through a traditional lender, if you can meet their underwriting guidelines. Now, there's other sources of funding like crowdfunding, investment through actual investors or family and friends, and all of these are going to have or should have contracts in place. What happens? How am I going to get my money back that I invested in your business, or is this just a gift, right? And that's mainly for friends and family investment. For nonprofit lenders, are going to require that you meet certain thresholds before they release the funds, right? Even though they're able to lend to true startups and businesses that don't meet those underwriting guidelines, for whatever reasons, they can work with you, okay? And because they can work with you doesn't mean that they're going to give you the money that
you're requesting.
That you're requesting, right? So they're going to take all of that information that I mentioned earlier into consideration and say, okay, well, based off of where you're at right now on a personal level, can you afford to pay back this loan if the business doesn't work out the way you had hoped it would?
Ouch. That's one of those holes that they poke in it.
Exactly.
Because you have this pie in the sky mindset. Oh, yeah, I'll be able to pay it back because you're being rose-colored glasses. Oh, yeah, I'll be able to pay you back and blah, blah, blah. But if you can't pay your bills on a normal, regular basis, and that's part of your credit history that they take into account as well, how can you afford to pay back a $10,000 loan if your business goes? And that's one of the things they want to be able to address. And sometimes those individuals don't think about that.
Yeah, and it's, they mitigate risk, okay? And they're very good at it. And if they say, not right now, there's a good reason behind it, right? And as business owners, our businesses are our babies. And you can't tell us our baby's not good enough. Right.
We don't like rejection. Our babies are always cute.
Exactly, right? And I like to use this example, right? It's, the parent with the demon child, right? We all know that parent, right? The kids running around the playground biting and kicking the other kids. And then when you approach the parent, you tell them, hey, your child just kicked my child. No, not my baby. My baby's an angel. No. Your baby's the angel of death, right? So, we oftentimes think of our businesses as an angel. It's our baby, and we're going to protect it. And you got to be flexible if you're looking to access capital, right? Because, they're not telling you not right now because they don't want to give you money.
Right.
They're telling you not right now because there are things that you need to work on to improve your capacity, for example, so that way, if your business doesn't work out, you're not out on the streets begging for money, right? Because they don't want to lend to someone who can't afford to pay it back, who is already stretched out very thin, okay? And sometimes it's like, okay, well, work on this, come back, then we can increase the dollar amount, right? Or it's and I see this pretty often. It's here's the funds, but it's not what you asked for, right? And this is where you have to be flexible and have a range before you start speaking to lenders, because they may counter you and say, you asked for $50,000, but based off of all of this information, you only qualified for 10. Is 10 good enough, right? And earlier you mentioned that, you know, they're on cloud nine. They think their business is going to be the exception. They're going to do great things. But that's only if you get all the funding, right? And what happens if you don't get all of the funding? One of the things that I recommend is that they have a list that captures all of the essentials, all the requirements, right? The bare minimum, if you would. What does that scenario look like? If I don't qualify for the $50,000,
what can I do with the 10
Well,
or the 20 or
what
the
is the
30?
minimum that I need, right? Just, you know, to get started, right? This is my stepping stone.
Right.
Okay, I can work with that, and then I can start to build up revenue, start to capture the actual numbers, and then start to establish a relationship with this financial institution. So that way, when I go back and ask for more money, there's a great chance that they'll say yes.
Sure, especially if you paid the bills on time.
Oh, yeah.
If you repaid it on time and you paid it maybe even early, because say, for instance, you were eligible for that $10,000 loan. You asked for 50, but you landed among the stars and you got 10. You run with the 10 and you make it into more, you pay your bills back. All of a sudden now, 5 years, 3 years, 2 years later, I need a loan for $50,000. Your numbers look better. And you got a history of paying on time and you pay back the 10. Like, well, let's see. And the underwriter, he still pokes his holes because that's his job. But then they say, okay, well, you're not eligible for 50, but you can do 40. And all of a sudden now your wish list starts to look a lot better because I'm so close versus the 10 2 years ago. So that's critical.
Yeah, and you know, and there are many occasions where we've had clients who have come to Live Fund, gone through the business education aspect of it, right, and then have decided, I need a loan. They go through the loan process. They get a smaller dollar amount than they had anticipated, but they ran with it, right? And then one or two things happens, or one or three things. One, they're like, this was enough. It was enough to kind of get into the swing of things, and I was able to generate more money, and I generated more money than I had anticipated. Now I don't need a loan. Thank you for that, right? I didn't have to put myself in a very tough situation where I was, you know, nickel and diming everything, right? Or the next scenario is, you know, I did this, I had great results, but now because of this growth that I've experienced because of that loan, I need to access more capital. And they come back and they say, hey, you know, what does it look like for accessing $50,000? Am I good for that? Yes, maybe. If not, the 40, right? And then you run with that. And then they come back. The third one is they go, they get the loan, they use the funds, they have a great quarter, a year, 2 years, what have you, and then they find out that they can go to a traditional lender, and a traditional lender will say, hey, you know what, you know, we saw what happened with working with Live Fund. You did great. You paid them back. It's reflecting on your credit report. Here's a deal we have for you. This has happened too. And you know, as a nonprofit lender, that's what we're here for, right? We're here to get you to that point where you can eventually go to a traditional lender. If you did that, we did our job, right? If you come back to us, that's cool too. We're not going to say no, but if you're able to grow, awesome.
Thank you for joining us on Let's Talk, hosted by David B Plemons, CPA. We want to thank our guest, Carlos Acosta of Live Fund, for his insights into capital funding. But this is only part one. Join us next week for part two as we complete the interview with Mr. Acosta concerning capital funding for your small business. For more information about any of our guests, or if you have questions and comments, email us at admin@PlemonsCPA.com. And don't forget to check out our website, PlemonsCPA.com, for upcoming events and workshops. Have a great day.